Hello, and welcome to part 3 of the guide to AOI Hub reporting templates. In this session, we're going to be looking in detail at accounts data. Accounts data is entered using the accounts data worksheet. First of all, let's take a look at the toolbar. Some key buttons on here: About AOI Hub, shows the template version. The Go to Config button takes you back to the config worksheet. Import data starts the process of importing data from another Excel worksheet, and we'll see that in a moment. Validate starts the validation process, and we'll see more about that later. And Create reports starts the process of creating FATCA and CRS reports. Account details allows you to view and edit information for a selected account. Insert row allows you to insert one or more rows on the spreadsheet. For example, if you select multiple rows and then insert, you can insert multiple rows if you wish. Similarly, delete allows you to delete one or more rows. I've skipped over the Add Controlling Persons button there. We'll look at that later when we come to look at passive NFEs. The Recycle button allows you to remove any accounts data from the template without removing FI and other data. The Options button opens the options screen, and finally the Help button accesses the online help pages. Notice that on this toolbar I've got descriptions underneath each button. If you didn't want those to display, you can go into Options and you can untick the display button descriptions on toolbars. Update will then give you a more streamlined toolbar without those descriptions. I'm just going to turn those back on for the purposes of this demonstration. There are three main ways that you can get data into the template. The first method is what I refer to as the spreadsheet entry method. So you can simply enter data here, work your way across from left to right, making your entries and selections. You'll note that as you start to select and enter data, certain cells may become greyed out where they're not relevant. So for example, here I've selected the investment as the account type, and certain categories of income are not relevant, so they become greyed out. I'm just going to carry on entering some information. Note also that the worksheet is split into areas: basic account information, financial information. We then have account holder details, where you would select the type of account holder and their name. We then have address details, including all of the address fields that you may need. Then birth information, in the case of an individual, with date and, if it's relevant, place of birth. And finally, tax information, either undocumented or enter the jurisdiction of residence and the TIN of the account holder. We have here up to 3 jurisdictions, so in the case of individuals or entities that might be dual resident, or possibly resident in up to 3 countries or jurisdictions. Also note that the toolbar's not in view. If I click on the double-headed arrow, that will recenter the toolbar. I can see it again there. I'm just going to go back to the start of the sheet. So that's the first method, the spreadsheet data method. The second method you can use to enter data is using the account details screen to edit and enter details of an individual account one at a time. To do that, you click anywhere on a cell, click on the account details button, and that will open up the account details screen. The account details screen is showing you the same information that you saw in the spreadsheet view. It's just laid out in a tabbed format. So here I've got tabs for the basic account info, financial information, account holder details, address details, birth information, tax information, and finally reporting options. Just taking a little bit more of a look through in detail each of those. So on the basic account info we have the account number, which is mandatory in most cases, account number type, which is usually not mandatory, optional. For FATCA and CRS it has these options of IBAN, OBAN, etc. if you want to include that. Account type is usually not required. However, if you select that, it then does refine your financial information to not enable the categories of income that aren't relevant. So for example here I've chosen investment, and so it's grayed out the interest, dividends, proceeds that aren't relevant. We've then got indicators if the account was closed, if the account was dormant. We've also got this flag here to say if it was a joint account. That's not something that's currently part of the reporting, but if you use that, we have some built-in validation that you can perform to check if the information between joint accounts is consistent. Moving on through the financial information, we saw that briefly a moment ago. We have the drop-down list for the currency, and then enter the account balance and income by category. In the account holder tab, you select the account holder type, either individual, active NFE or passive NFE, owner documented FI for FATCA purposes only, or financial institution. The reason we've got financial institution there as an account holder type is that you can, if you want to, put all of your account data into this template, and then we would exclude from the reporting certain account types that aren't reportable, for example account holders that are FIs. Once you've selected the type, you will then enter either the organisation name or the individual's name. Address Details tab allows you to enter details of the address. One of the good things about entering data in this way is that you get the validation checks as you go along. So for example there the country fields required, and if validating the address is required, and as I start to make entries on here you'll see that the validations update as well. So that address is now valid. Moving on to birth information, where you enter the date and, if it's relevant, the place of birth. Tax information, you can enter the jurisdiction of residence and the TIN. We've also got this visual indicator if the jurisdiction that you select is CRS reportable. For example, by contrast, if I enter a country that's not, then you don't have that tick. Similarly, if I enter US, you don't have that CRS tick because that data is going to go into FATCA reporting instead. Note that here it's telling me the TIN is required because now for FATCA, in almost all circumstances, you require a TIN, even if that is a particular placeholder code, for example, something like that, with the codes denoting a particular reason why you couldn't have a TIN. Final tab on here, Reporting Options, gives you the ability to exclude an account for reporting either entirely or from FATCA or from CRS. And again, as I said a moment ago, this allows you to put all of your accounts into the template and then use these options to exclude them from the reporting. Once you've finished editing in this mode, you would then click on Update to save the changes and go back to the main screen. That then relays all of that information that you just edited there back onto the main spreadsheet version. So that's the second method for entering accounts data. The third method you can use is to import data from another Excel worksheet. Before I walk you through the process, we're just going to look at an example of the type of data that you might want to import. This is an example of a spreadsheet with information you want to import. It has a row here with all your column headings, then it has all your account details that you want to import. Back to the AOI Hub template, I would start the process by clicking on Import Data. You then need to select the workbook by clicking here and Browse. Then select the worksheet. You then need to enter the headings row, so that's the row in the source data that contains the column headings, in this case row 1, and then the first data row where the data starts in that spreadsheet. In my example, that's row 2. There are then options to replace existing data on the worksheet that would overwrite anything in the template. And remember, these details is useful if you need to re-import later, because it will remember all of these details when you come to start the import process. I'm going to click on Import. What that then does is it checks all of the columns in the source data to see if they match up with our standard fields in the template. In this case, it's found 2 that don't: date, account opened, and legal entity name. Date account opened I'm not concerned about because that's not a field that we use in the template, but the legal entity name is. That's absolutely fine because that's where the mapping file comes into play. If I click on Edit Mapping, that will open up the mapping file, which is saved in the same location as the reporting template. Now, in my data, I had a column headed up Legal Entity Name. In the template, that is the field that we call Organisation Name. So this first column is all of our standard field names, headings. The grey columns are our standard mappings, and then if you want to associate a column heading from your data, you simply enter the text in these green cells. So I type there legal entity name, and that will ensure that it maps it to our organisation name, as that's the same. When I then save this and go back to the template, I'll show you how the import will now work. Back to the template, if I repeat the process, I then need to click on Sync Mapping before I proceed. That's updated and I've got a green tick. I'm then going to click on Import. It's again warning me that it's found a column that couldn't be matched, but I'm happy with that because that's not something that we use. So I'll click on Continue. That's imported 97 rows. I'm asked if I'd like to run validation. I will, because that's really useful to see if there's any errors. And that's actually found 3 errors. If I click on OK, it will take me to the errors worksheet. So this errors worksheet has now appeared because we have errors. For each of the errors that it's identified, we have an error code that's listed here, and full details of the error codes are contained in our help pages. If I click on the help button to access the online help, that's taken me to the errors page in the online help, giving me more information about the type. And if I go to account errors, it will list all of the possible error codes and checks that we perform in the template with description and more information. Back to the template, we also then display the financial institution name, the account row reference, account number, and then a brief description of the error, which is hyperlinked back to the source of that. So in this case, first name is required. If I click on the hyperlink, it will take me back to the cell with the first name on the accounts data sheet. On the account sheet, what we also have on the toolbar is an errors filter at the top. And what you can do here, which is useful, is filter so you only show the accounts with errors. That's filtered down to reduce on screen what I can see as just the 3 accounts that are affected. I can resolve these issues by editing data in here on spreadsheet mode. What I can also do, if I see that this row is affected by one or more errors, if I click on the Account Details tab, and then if I click on Update, it will highlight to me which tab has the error. In this case, Address Details, and I can see it's missing the country field. I'm going to complete that. I know in this case it's Spain, and if I click on Update, that will save the change. Similarly, I'm going to do that for the final account on there that has an issue. Click on update. Again, it's in address details. I can see what's been done wrong here. They've entered the wrong code. Should have been GB. Update will resolve that. Once you've gone through and fixed any errors, you then need to click on the validate button to rerun the validations. That's now told me that there are no errors, so the errors worksheet is now not visible. What I'm going to move on to show you now is how you add controlling persons to a passive NFE. I've got a row on here, passive NFE, where we have the green family trust, and what you do to add controlling persons to that is click anywhere on the row for this account, and the add controlling persons is now enabled. I click on add controlling persons and it will open up a controlling person screen where I can start to enter details about my controlling person. Enter their name, these tabs are similar to the account details tabs. You can see you have details about the individual's name, address details, birth information, and the tax information in terms of jurisdictions and TINs. Once you're happy with all of that, you can click on Create, and that will save and add the controlling person underneath the passive NFE. So the way in which the template works is that you add any controlling persons directly underneath the passive NFE on the worksheet. So you could do that by using the Add Controlling Persons button, or alternatively you could simply, as you're going through, ensure that you enter the details of the controlling persons using this controlling person substantial owner type to denote it as a controlling person. If I run the validate again, just to both validate and tidy everything up on the sheet, as part of the validation process it also updates all this numbering on the left hand side. And one thing you'll note here is that account number 8, which is the Green Family Trust, a passive NFE, then has underneath it 8_CP1, which is the first controlling person for that account. If I were then to add another controlling person, it would add under there. I'll just do one quickly just to show you. Click on Create. See, it's added that second row underneath, and if I click on Validate, that's updated the numbering and the controlling persons underneath. So that's run through the main methods of getting data in and editing data on the accounts data worksheet. We've looked at a passive NFE. What I'd like to look at now are some more advanced features we have in terms of extra validations, and these are contained within the options screen. So if I click on the options button, in the validate tab we have an additional check for duplicates. If I click on this checkbox, identify potential duplicate records, and I'm going to just unselect these just to show you what would happen if we try and identify any potential duplicates where the account number is the same. Click on Update. I'm going to click and run on Validate. That's identified 4 potential duplicate account records. If I click on OK, the duplicate records sheet has said it's found one set of data potentially duplicated across 2 rows and another set of data duplicated across 2 rows. If I go to the accounts data sheet, similar to what we saw with the errors, I can filter to only display those identified potential duplicate records. And it looks like I've got two issues here. The first two, I have, if I look at the data on here, similar sort of balances, an account number, but as I look across, there are two different individuals. So what this looks like to me is a genuine joint account. Whereas if I look at the second set of records I've got here, pink, the values are looking the same, individual, and actually the name and the address and all the details look like they're the same. That looks like that is a duplicate record, an error. So what we can do to refine that a bit, if we go to the options, I go back to validate, is that we can select all of the criteria for identifying duplicates, to identify duplicates only when the account number and the name and the TIN and the address are all the same. If I update and rerun the validation check, this time it's only found two potential affected rows. And if we go back and filter on the accounts data, we can see that is the second example I was just looking at. So I think in that case that is a duplicate. I can safely delete that row that I think is duplicate and then rerun the validation. What we also have within the advanced validation tools, if I go to the options, is that we also have additional validation checks. And if I tick this box to include additional validation checks, on here we have some extra checks and you can choose which ones you run. For example, we can look for accounts that have been flagged as dormant but there's income, if the country of address doesn't match any of the jurisdictions, and we also have some options for FATCA and CRS. All of the validations in this additional validation checks will not necessarily cause the submission to fail. They're additional checks that might indicate issues with the data quality, but they're not fundamental issues that we would identify as errors. If we select additional checks we want to perform, and then again rerun the validation, this time the validation checks have been complete and identifying warnings. So warnings are what we present if you run the additional validation checks and any issues are found, rather than errors, which mean that there's going to be a fundamental problem with the submission. So in this time, looking at the warning sheet, this is now similar to our errors sheet. It gives us a warning code, which is detailed in the help pages, financial institution, the row reference, account number, and the description. Once again, as with the errors highlighted back on the sheet, this time in orange rather than yellow, so any warnings are highlighted in orange, errors highlighted in yellow, and once again you can filter the sheet to only show you the rows that have warnings. The final area I'm going to look at in this session is how we deal with multiple financial institutions and the accounts that are associated. In this case, I've got three reporting financial institutions: the Diamond Fund, Emerald and Ruby. On the accounts data, what we need to do is use the FI number in the first column here to denote which FI the account relates to. So on the config sheet, the FIs are 1, 2 and 3, so the accounts data needs to be either 1, 2 or 3 as appropriate. So in this case most of the accounts are 1 for the Diamond Fund, Summer 2, Summer 3. We will throw up validation errors if you don't complete the number or if it's not valid. You can also see, if you view an account through the account details, that the financial institution is displayed here. So if you're editing using this method, you can also change the FI there. On the toolbar we then have some filters, so you can display the accounts by FI, either all financial institutions or select the FI. For example, if I just select Emerald Investment Fund, it will filter and only show the accounts on screen for that FI. The number of accounts here is also shown, a counter of 11 accounts. If I show the other FI, just to demonstrate, that had 26 accounts. You can also use that in connection with this reportable accounts filter, where you can select FATCA, CRS or not reportable. For example, if I select CRS reportable, it's shown me that for this fund, CRS reportable is 15. And if I again change this back to all financial institutions across all of the FIs, CRS reportable 56. If again I switch it to all accounts, 96 the total. So you can use those in combination to filter, and the accounts counter is quite handy there as well. That concludes this part of the guide. In the final part coming up, we'll be looking at the process of creating the FATCA and CRS reports.